All right, everyone. So today we're jumping into this incredible book, Ukraine in America. And it kicks off with a really profound question. How on earth does a community build power and influence when, according to all the official records, they don't even exist? Let's dive in.
So, the book throws us right into this scene at Ellis Island. Imagine this. An immigrant arrives and says they're Ukrainian, but the clerk looks down at his list of countries and, well, there's no Ukraine on the map. So he just shrugs and writes down the empire the person fled from. Austria, maybe Russia. And this happens over and over. It's not just a mistake, it's erasure by paperwork.
And this leads to the book's core idea, this concept of the ledger ghost. You have people who are physically right here. They're sweating in the mines, they're working in the factories. But on paper, in the official census, they are ghosts. They're invisible, just swallowed up by the statistics of other empires. And that is the fundamental problem they have to overcome.
So, for this first part, we really need to get our heads around this core problem of invisibility. Why leave everything you know only to become a ghost in a new country?
Well, the book frames the decision to leave not as some romantic dream, but as cold, hard math. Back home in Galicia, the farms were called dwarf holdings because they were just too small to feed a family. Starvation wasn't a possibility, it was a mathematical certainty. America, on the other hand, it wasn't about streets paved with gold. It was about something much more real. Cash wages, a way to finally escape that brutal math.
And you can see here how the reasons for leaving just got more and more desperate over the decades. It starts with hunger in the 1890s. Then, it becomes about escaping the draft, being forced to fight for an empire that oppresses you. And by the 1930s, it's about fleeing for your life, running from political purges and state-sponsored starvation. The stakes just kept getting higher and higher.
But getting to America wasn't the end of the struggle, not by a long shot. Instead, they were dropped right into the crucible of America's industrial wars. Now get this, because this is a really critical point the book makes. They weren't welcomed as fellow immigrants. They were deployed like weapons. The big industrialists recruited them specifically to be strikebreakers, which immediately put them in conflict with the Irish and Welsh miners who were already there. They literally stepped off the boat into a war zone.
And this slide just lays out the trap they were in. The company town, the coal patch, was a totally closed system. The company owned your house, it owned the store where you bought your food, it even owned the police force. If you stepped out of line, you weren't just fired, you and your family were evicted. It was basically a new form of feudalism, just hidden away in the hills of Pennsylvania.
So, faced with this total control, this hostility, this invisibility, what did they do? They didn't just survive, they started to build. They created an entire parallel world with its own economy right there in the shadows of the coal mines. And to really appreciate what they built, you have to understand what they were working with, which was next to nothing. A miner, if he was lucky, brought home about $30 a month. That's it. That was nowhere near enough to survive on, let alone get ahead.
And this is where the genius of the home economy comes in, and it was run almost exclusively by women. By taking in single miners as boarders, a woman could often double the family's income. The gazdinya, the boarding house mistress, she wasn't just cooking and cleaning. She was the family's chief financial officer. She was the one who made the whole enterprise work.
They also built their own safety nets. No commercial insurer would touch a coal miner. It was just too dangerous. So they created their own insurance through these fraternal lodges. Everybody would pool their pennies and dimes, and that created a financial firewall. If a man was killed in the mine, his widow got a death benefit. It was enough to keep the family from completely falling apart. It was brilliant.
Now, here's a part of the book I found absolutely fascinating. It shows how culture wasn't just about being nostalgic for the old country. It was actually a critical tool for survival in the new one. So first, you have to just picture this environment. The book describes it as a world of, filth. Constant, encroaching grime, where coal dust got into everything, coated every surface. A world of industrial chaos.
And in the middle of all that chaos, they created this, a paisenka, a decorated egg. The book argues this wasn't just a folk craft, it was a defiant act. Creating this object perfect, precise, beautiful geometry was a way of pushing back against the grime and disorder of their lives. It was a counter-argument to chaos.
Music, too, was a form of resistance. The bandura, this instrument, and the epic songs they played, the dumi, they were like a portable national archive. They carried the history, the stories, the identity that was being wiped off the official ledgers. So just the act of sitting on your porch in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and playing this music, that was a political victory.
Okay, so you see how they built all these internal systems, right? The economics, the safety nets, the culture. All of it was laying the groundwork for the community's next giant leap, moving from just surviving to demanding a real political voice, from defense to offense. And a huge turning point was the wave of refugees that came after World War II. This table just shows how different they were. The first wave, mostly peasants fleeing hunger. This new wave, they were educated, they were professionals, they were politically savvy, and they were fleeing terror. They didn't come here just to earn a living, they came to organize and build a political base.
And this new blood, this new energy, it led to a massive strategic pivot. The community's focus shifted from building their own halls, their churches and community centers, to lobbying in the halls of power in Washington, D.C. They weren't just creating a parallel world anymore. They were fighting to change the American world itself.
So when you take a step back and look at this whole story, what's the big takeaway? What's the permanent footprint they left?
Here's the bottom line, and the book makes this point so powerfully. This is not a story about victims. It's a story of profound agency. These ledger ghosts, these people who are ignored by the government and exploited by corporations, they absolutely refuse to be victims. Power was not something that was given to them. They built it piece by piece from the ground up.
And that leaves us with this final question, which is perfect for our discussion. The book argues that this community built power by creating its own parallel world when the existing world shut them out. It's an incredible model of self-reliance. And it just makes you wonder, what can we learn from that model today? A lot to think about there.